Today's project on the IROC is a transmission fluid and filter change. Now that I've got some miles on it, all I've done so far was make sure the transmission was topped up. When I pulled the engine and disconnected cooler lines and so forth, I lost a little oil, so I've added a half a pint or a pint, I forget the exact amount. But I had to bring it back to level when the car got put back together. But I have no idea when this oil was changed. Being that it had 100,000 miles on it, it might never have been changed because the normal service interval for these cars, I think if you weren't doing trailer towing or something severe, was 100,000 interval. So, with that being the case that I don't know, now that things are running, I'm going to give it a fresh change. I don't really have any complaints about the transmission other than it's a little firm when it's cold, and when it warms up it tends to smooth out. Let me start by just pulling the dipstick. I've got the car up on ramps for a start. I'll just get a fresh dip even though the level won't be right because the engine's not running. But so the oil is it's a little discolored. It's not bad. It's not burned. It looks to me like kind of like transmission fluid that's been got a lot of miles on it. I've had the car out and warmed up, and so that when I drain it, that the transmission is drains well. I'm going to let the car cool off a few minutes here, so get the exhaust and so forth cooled off a little bit, and then I'm going to use my suction tool that this guy, and I'm going to feed down the dipstick and suction out as much as I can. The challenge when you do automatic transmission changes is you have to drop the pan, and when it's full, it's messy. I've done it a bunch of times. It's messy because there's no drain plug. You could put one in perhaps, but the reason the transmission engineers don't put in a drain plug is that typically what they want is they want you to change the filter, and if you give someone a drain plug, they're less likely to change the filter. But it really is messy. So since I have this suction tool, I'm going to take advantage of it. I've never been able to do that before. So anyway, I'm going to suction this down. I'm going to go underneath, drop the pan. I got a fresh filter, and I've got 6 or 7 or 8 quarts of fresh Dexron. Actually, I bought Dexron 6. There are some people out there some companies that sell Dexron 3 equivalents. When this car was built, it would have been a Dexron 2 actually. But I know that GM, when they replace the oils Dexron with new ones, it's always supposed to be backwards compatible. I've even pulled up their service bulletin for Dexron 6, and as of several years ago, I'm trying to remember the exact year, it's probably around 2010, they stopped licensing Dexron 3. So anyone out there, any major oil company that's selling Dexron 3 equivalent, there's no licensing for that anymore. You're not sure what they're selling you. I'm going to assume that it's good, but I'm not saying that they're selling bad stuff. But GM doesn't have a license on it any longer to verify quality control. And their service bulletin says, use Dexron 6, which is a synthetic fluid. So when you do this change, you only change about half the fluid, roughly. There's a fair amount still remaining in the torque converter and in the passageways. So I'm going to make a change. I'm going to change the filter. We'll see how the transmission performs. And perhaps I'll have to change the fluid again. Anything's possible when you're doing this. So anyway, I'm going to get to work and I'll be back. Okay, so I have my hose down the dipstick tube. I've started putting a little vacuum on it. And we'll see if we can get it to to suck down here. Alright, that ought to be enough to get the suction really going good. And you can see down here at the bottom it's already pulling fluid, so we'll see how much we get. I think the answer is about 6 quarts that comes out and 5 quarts that would remain. But we'll just we'll let this go ahead and pull. It really is nice. Having only used this once before, you know, you just put suction on it, as you saw with a few pumps, and it puts vacuum in that chamber, and it's just going to sit here and pull. So I'll let it keep going until it's done, and then, as I said, I'll get underneath and work on getting the pan loose. But I mean, I imagine there will still be some mess coming out of the pan. I probably won't get it all, but it ought to be easier than if I've got 6 quarts that it's going to come down on my head, so to speak. Now I've gotten under the car here and I'm getting ready to drop the pan. Just going to have to back these guys out. Can't see them all, so I'm kind of doing some of this by feel. The ones in the back are a little trickier because they're like right up against the cross member, and so it'll be a little bit tricky to get the pan out around the cross member. I'd like it to break loose in this back corner first, if I could. Just as we're doing this, these two go up against that bracket, and so they have two that go up against the bracket don't have a washer. All of the other ones do have a washer. I'm trying to back these out and not take them all the way out until I'm confident I'm not going to get a face full, but it bolts loose all the way around. Okay, it's the last bolt. And let's see what we got. There we go. Just have to scoot it forward a little bit and set her on the floor. Looky there. We'll just let that drip for a bit. So as I said, I did have to move the pan just a little bit forward to clear the cross member. Otherwise, that wasn't too bad. There's the filter. Just looking at the fluid in the pan, though, doesn't look too bad. Need to go up here where the filter was and get the seal out of it. And I don't want to put dirt in it, so come on. I'll have to get a tool to pull that out, I think.
or this seal's really difficult. So I'm using is one of these right angle pick tools. I've been at it for a while, but the trick has been to get in underneath at the very top of it and just kind of yank on it. And I've got it moving now, so I'm going to just keep pulling on it until I get it to the point where it pops out. There, like that. And that thing's pretty hard. It feels like it's got a steel core. It's rubber on the outside, steel in the middle. The new filter comes with a new seal, so the new one will be going in. It looks like the bore's okay. I'll be back. I'm going to clean up the pan rail on the bottom with something, wipe it down with some solvent, make sure it's clean. I don't see anything that I need to scrape. It was a rubber type gasket. So here's a better look at that seal. And I didn't want to scratch the bore, but I used a right angle tool to go up the center of it and catch the upper edge and just keep working around the perimeter of it until it started to come loose. It was just really, the rubber was just really stuck in there. But that's out. Is the pan. The oil looks pretty nice and red, and I don't see a lot of debris in the pan. I'm going to go empty it. So there we go with the oil drained. The pan looks pretty good. It's not full of wear debris, but there's some sludge on the magnet, as you can probably see. But that's not unusual to have a little bit of wear debris there. So I don't see like piles of friction material, metal. Looks pretty clean. Alright, so I'm going to clean that magnet up. I'm going to clean out the pan, wipe it down, get the gasket, and get things going back together. The pan all cleaned up. New gasket laid out. No sealer. A little bit of petrolatum. Just some dabs around to keep the gasket stuck down so it won't walk around. That's kind of standard practice. The pan rail's been all cleaned up. I didn't have to scrape it. I just wiped it down with some alcohol. I'm going to do one more thing here just before I go put this in. I was just noticing as I was getting ready to put the filter in that there's a little bit of residue from the previous O-ring in there. A little bit of just the paint, you want to call it, the orange that was on the outside of the seal. Alright, so here's my new filter and seal, and the little petrolatum on the seal so that it slides in properly. Let's see if we can get that guy to go in there. There it goes. Good. Up against the valve body. Nice and solid. Not sure about that little spring. I've got it on the top of the filter, which is where it was when I took it apart. I think it looks to me like they use that to hold it down against the pan, or to keep it flat. I'm not sure. I went back and looked at my service manual, and it doesn't even show that spring. So, but I always like to make sure I get things back together right. Like I say, the spring was underneath when I took it apart, so that's where it's going to go when I go back together. I got the pan all lined up, so we'll lift it in place. Just to make sure I have a couple bolts ready. There we go. I'm going to go on camera over again if I'm not careful, but let's see if we can prevent that. Get in here on the other side. It's shifted, moved out of position just a little bit here, so. I'll make sure all these get finger started. I don't want to do anything where you don't want to cross thread these into aluminum. Also, this was a neoprene type gasket. When I was shopping for filters, it looked like not all the kits were the same. There were some that were cork, which means the next time you do it, you've got a lot more scraping and things to do. So I opted for the better gasket, which came in a kit from Wix Filters. I just don't want to tighten any of these at all tight until I get all the bolts started so that I know that the gasket's in position. This cross member is kind of challenging. It's not going to go right. Okay, I got to get a different wrench. I did incidentally set parking brake and block the rear wheels so that in the event that I accidentally knocked it out of park, it wouldn't go anywhere. Since I'm, disconnecting the shift linkage here. Well, it's still connected at that end, but the shifter isn't holding it when you take the bracket off. So. Okay, well, I'm back. When I left, that back corner bolt, which is back here, so I've switched sides, was obstructed by the cross member, and I couldn't get my fingers in to turn it in. Well, I could get it a couple of turns, and then it got stuck. So I've put a jack and a jack stand under the cross member. The jack's actually holding it, but the jack stand is right there, so the transmission can't come down. Dropped the cross member, took the pan back down so I could get a good look. But what I want to do is run a tap through that hole. I tried, after the cross member was down, I tried to get a straight shot and see if I could thread the bolt in, and that wasn't working. So I've got a tap, and we're going to see if I can get the tap in there and chase those threads and make sure it's right. My bet is that somebody in the past had the same trouble I was having and just went ahead and got stuff in there and damaged threads. So we're going to see if this will work. The problem with retapping sometimes is with chasing threads that are damaged is you got to make sure that you get the tap in straight, which is why I went ahead and dropped the pan back down, because I want to go in here real nice and easy and try to make sure that I pick up the original threads, not what was damaged. And that's going to probably be a little fun, but let's see here how we do. I'll wiggle this real carefully. Let's see if we can clean those up. Feels pretty good right now. Not having to push too hard. But when I tried to get this bolt in before, I could see that there were chunks of aluminum missing down at the bottom. So I don't know what caused it to do that, but I'm going to just make sure that we chase this hole out. It's going pretty good right now. Take it right on down. The danger in tapping, like I say, chasing a hole, is that if you pick up the cross threads, you can end up with a problem, creating a second set of threads. So you just have to be gentle. But I think I'm pretty clear that I've picked up the right ones. That feels pretty good. But by taking the pan down, I could see the threads, and I could get a closer look at what I was doing rather than trying to run the tap through the hole in the pan and through the gasket. So now that I got the tap through there, this has taken me several extra hours because I actually didn't have a tap with me. I had to go buy one. I have a tap and die set, but it isn't here with me at the garage. So
Now that goes in real nice. I can spin that in by hand now. That's why you always finger start things, because you don't want to be in the spot where you have to go drill one of these things and helicoil it, which is the next step. And helicoils, thread inserts work nicely, but if you can save the original threads with a tap by being just a little gentle, and run the bolt back and forth through here a couple times, and I'll lubricate it with a little petrolatum when it goes in for good. That was worth the wait. Well, I'm just about ready to go back up with the pan. I'm going to circle back here at something, and right here there's a spring clip, and I have it up at the bottom of the filter. I mentioned this before. When I took it apart, that's how it was set. So I'm putting it back the same way, but in the meantime I've been going back and searching my service manuals because I wasn't real familiar with that and what it does. In looking at my book for the 85, they don't really talk about it much, but it's there in 85, and my later technician's manuals, like from 1990 or so, it's gone. Also in 85, the filter in the pictures is larger than this. It comes back further, and it actually looks like the inlet, instead of being on the bottom, is on the top. So it may have been important with that larger filter to make sure that it was tight against the bottom of the pan all the time. In this case, you have to turn the filter, clock it just a little bit for that spring even to touch, and that's what I've done, because again, that's how it came apart, and it was working fine that way. But I kind of think now that the filter is smaller and has a bottom inlet, that perhaps that spring is even redundant and doesn't matter. Like I say, it's not there on the newer 4L60s, 700 R4s. Interesting detail, and if you've watched many of my videos, you know that I want to make sure things are done right, and that I don't come back and do it a second time because I did it wrong and damaged something. So try to figure out the way the engineers intended. Also, if I go in the book and I look at the pictures for the wiring diagram and how the wires are routed, they show that spring, they show a view from the bottom, and they show that spring in a dotted line underneath the filter as it would be holding the filter down toward the pan. And in the parts list, it's called a clip filter retainer. That was what it was for, but apparently not necessary anymore. So now I think I've got everything ready. I got that hole tapped. And I also had to do some more cleaning because given that the pan sat there all night and things were dripping on it, I had to go clean off the oil that was left. There we go. Always want to finger start those things. The threads into aluminum are very unforgiving. I'm going to get the crossmember back in. One of the challenges I have is the factory shop manual for this car leaves some things out. Now maybe it's my version because I have the loose leaf. It's kind of like not the final version, but it gives a lot of information about how to overhaul the transmission. But when you get to the sections where it says put the transmission in the car, it refers you to other sections that don't seem to exist. I can't find a section in my manual where it tells you to install or remove the crossmember. What I can't find is torque values for some of these bolts. So this is a 10 millimeter. It's going into a section that was a little bit rusted. I'm going to put never sees on these guys just to, one, lubricate them, and two, I'll say protect for the future for coming back the next time. These appear to be thread cutting screws. They're trilobular. They're not round. They're for torquing 10 millimeter bolts. They want to know how hard they are, of course. And this particular style bolt doesn't actually have a marking on it. It looks like just a manufacturer's marking. So I'm going to assume that they're not high strength if they're like self-tapping bolts.
which means that the torque for an 8.8 is about 50 foot-pounds. Crossmember has slots in it, and it does have the ability to move around some. You know, where do they want it positioned? Does it have a preferred spot, or does it matter? Since I had so much fun getting to that fastener, I guess I'll leave it positioned toward the back. The bolt on the transmission mount doesn't look rusty. It looks pretty well lubricated, so I'm not going to worry about that one, because that puts the mount about in the center. Well, actually looks pretty good. I would say the transmission mount bolt is kind of close to the middle of its slot. I changed my mind on the torque. I realized I made a calculation error. They should be about 30. That's better. Drop this scissors jack down and make sure the transmission has got its weight sitting on the cross members. There we go. I have a nice, clean, thoroughly cleaned funnel, a gallon jug of Deck 6, and another quart. I've got a couple more quarts off to the side, but I think I'm going to start with 5 quarts. Based on what came out, I had 4 liters roughly, which was roughly 4.5 quarts, I think. Then when I dumped the pan, there must have been a full another one in there. So we'll start with 5, and that ought to be enough to get it fired up and off the ramps, and then I can finish setting the level. One of the things you want to make sure is that you don't overfill these transmissions. If you get too much oil, it might seem okay at first, but as the transmission runs, it will churn that oil in the gears and clutch packs and cause it to foam, and then it'll overheat. The level will get even higher, and that can cause you all sorts of problems. Being sensitive to making sure that it's right is, I mean, too low is a problem because it'll slip. But you definitely don't want to overfill it. In fact, 4L60 700R4s, when you dip it, let's see if it'll show here. But there are 2 dots. See, when you get down to the bottom of the dipstick, you got the cross-hatched area, and then below it, there are 2 dots. And when you're cold, you really should be in those 2 dots. And if you're warm, it feels warm, you can still grab the stick kind of in the crosshatch, but when it's hot, and you can't really hold on to the stick because it's 180 degrees or so, that's about the only time you should be up near the top of the crosshatch there. So, and half a quart is all it takes to move you across that crosshatch range. So it's something you want to go very, very easy on. I've seen a lot of folks overfill them. So I'm going to try to fire it up, run it through all the gears, and back it off the ramps so that it's level. And then I'll come back and recheck it. Right smack in the middle between the 2 dots. Looks pretty good right there. So, that's all for now. I'm going to take it out, warm it up, and if I need to adjust level, I'll adjust level, but all done.